of the big impacts on Texas history is the influx of Anglo American settlers. The person who will start this Anglo American colonization is a man by the name of Moses Austin. Moses Austin was born in Connecticut in 1761. He then married and moved to Virginia in 1785. In Virginia, he owned a lead mine, and it was also in Virginia when his son Stephen was born. In 1798, though, the lead mine will go bankrupt. Moses will lose everything and he will move to Missouri, where again he will be able to own another lead mine. He will work there until just before the War of 1812, when an economic depression will hit the country and Moses Austin will lose everything. He will be bankrupt, and in 1820 he will come up with a new plan to make money for his family, what's known as the Texas Venture. In in that year of 1820, Moses Austin will travel 800 miles from Missouri to San Antonio. There he will meet with the Spanish governor and propose bringing 300 Anglo-American families to Texas. The governor rejects this plan because Spain did not want anyone from outside of the country moving to Texas or New Spain. But a friend of Moses Austin's there in San Antonio, a man by the name of Baron de Bastrop, will convince the governor to reconsider Moses Austin's idea. On his way home, Moses Austin will get sick. Then, in 1821, he will receive word that his plan was approved, but he will die from the sickness before he could bring anyone to Texas. When he dies, his plan of being an impresario and bringing settlers to Texas passes to his son, Stephen F. Austin. Austin will then go to Texas to meet with the Spanish governor and to find a site for his colony. He chooses the coastal plain between the Colorado and Brazos rivers. He then sends out a call for settlers. His plan called for any men that would move to the colony would receive 640 acres of land. They would get an extra 320 acres of land if the men had wives. They would get 160 more acres for each kid they brought, and for each slave that these men brought, they would get an extra 80 acres of land. If they were a skilled person, such as a doctor, a merchant, a carpenter, someone like that who could do a trade, then they received even more land. And because he wanted to bring in the agricultural, cotton-based society and economy that was in the American South, and he wanted to bring in slavery, Stephen F. Austin will specifically recruit people in the American South. The problem with his plan is he made a deal with Spain, and in 1821, Mexico wins its independence. So now, Stephen F. Austin's deal with Spain, he doesn't know if it's valid because it was with the previous government. So in 1822, Austin will travel to Mexico City, the new national capital of Mexico, to meet with the new Mexican government to make sure that he, Stephen F. Austin, still had the land that was part of the land grant he received from Spain and that his father had received. He will spend a year in Mexico City waiting for someone to talk to in the new government, but no one will talk to him because they're having turmoil and turnover as they're trying to get their new government organized. Finally, in 1823, a new law will be passed that gave him a contract for his colony. So his colony is legal and Stephen F. Austin can bring in people. The law also increased the amount of land that immigrants got if they would move to Mexico, specifically if they would move to Texas. The Mexican government wanted immigrants to come in because they wanted to build up their country, build up their economy, and make as much money as possible. The term that was used for Stephen F. Austin is an impresario. This is a land agent who brings new settlers to an area. While Austin was off making sure that all of this land was legal, the colonists were already living in his colony in Texas, and they're going to experience problems while he's gone. A drought is going to hurt their crops. The settlers are going to argue over land claims. Native Americans will raid the settlements. And when Austin returns in 1823, he's going to have to deal with all of these problems. Under the Mexican government, other changes are going to take place that are going to cause the Texas colonies to grow. On May 19th, 1822, Augustine de Iturbide is going to declare himself Emperor of Mexico. He's going to be overthrown in March of 1823, so 1 year later, and a new government will be created. This new government will be a democracy with elected officials, and there will be two groups that will fight for control. The Federalists, who want a weak central government with power shared among the states, and the Centralists, who want a very powerful central government. And they're going to both fight for control. The Federalists, the ones who want a weak central government and more power to the states, will gain control, and they will write a constitution, the Constitution of 1824, which is going to be the first major constitution governing Texas. And it's going to divide Mexico into 19 states and 4 territories. Each state is going to have its own power. That it's going to be the more power is going to reside in the states than in the federal government. And Texas will be part of the state called Coahuila y Tejas. Under the Constitution of 1824, each state could now make its own decisions about issuing land grants. There were some federal restrictions, though. Only a single family could not receive more than 48,708 acres. No land grant could be within 30 miles of the coast, and settlers had to agree to be permanent residents of Texas. They were moving there to live for their whole life. They weren't moving there to get some land and then sell it and get rich and leave. So the state of Coahuila Tejas will pass the State Colonization Law of 1825. The state government in Saltillo will pass this, and it's designed to attract settlers to Texas. Under this state law, each settler gets 4,428 acres of land for $30. Colonists did not have to pay taxes for a set number of years. Single men got a set amount of land, but they got more if they married, and they got even more if they married a Mexican woman, because then that would guarantee that they would stay in the area and be permanent Mexican citizens. Also, under the State Colonization Law of 1825, all immigrants had to become Catholic. So Austin's colonies are going to grow at this time. They're going to become profitable. He's going to, as a result, get more contracts to bring more people. In 1825, he'll bring 500 new families to Texas. In 1827, he'll get even more land from the government. And in 1831, he'll get another contract, but the area that he goes after was already claimed by another impresario. They had a contract dispute that the courts ruled in favor of the other impresario, so that one doesn't work out for Austin. But Austin's colonies are going to be successful. The main reason is he got good land. He was the first person to bring people into Texas, so he gets the best land, and he's a good leader. The area he picked had lots of resources. It had good water, good soil, good access to the coast for trade, and so that's going to make him profitable. As a result, Stephen F. Austin is known as the Father of Texas. Other impresarios are going to come, and they're not all going to be as successful as Stephen F. Austin. One of the impresarios was a man by the name of Green DeWitt. In 1825, he signed a contract to bring in 400 families. Then, 5 years later, Mexico passed the law of April 6, 1830, that limited immigration to Texas. It kept DeWitt from bringing in lots of people. He hadn't really brought in many of his colonists, so his colony's not going to be successful. It's going to struggle. And his wife, in 1831, will petition the governor for land in her own name to protect her family from poverty. Her argument is that her husband was not doing well financially, and if he failed, that would put her and the children in poverty. And she said if she could have her own land, that would protect them. And the governor will agree. She's one of the first women to own land in Texas. And then in 1835, DeWitt will die from cholera. Another impresario, Martin de Leon, in 1824, brought in 41 Mexican families. His is the only Texas colony to bring immigrants from Mexico up into Texas. He is the founder of the town of Victoria, and he's going to raise cattle, and he's one of the ones that's going to play a major role in establishing cattle as a large industry in Texas. Two other impresarios, James Power and James Hewitson, are going to bring in Irish immigrants. Others impresarios that you need to know, David G. Burnett, Hayden Edwards, and Lorenzo de Zavala, will all play a role. So the people of the colonies of Texas, the name we use to refer to the first families that Austin brought in are the Old 300. This is a very select group. It's still a big deal for families to trace their lineage in Texas back to the Old 300. Austin specifically picked who he wanted to move. He targeted people from the American South. They were farmers, handpicked by Austin because they had educations and they had money, so they could afford to move there. They also had experience farming, specifically raising cotton was what he wanted. He also targeted slave owners who brought the slavery system with them to Texas. So Texas and slavery in Texas being a slave state starts with the Austin colony. He is the one that will bring that in. And he wanted to promote that type of agriculture. Since the Old 300 were the first ones to arrive, they picked the best land, so they're going to be most successful. One of the people who will come with this is a lady by the name of Jane Long. She had come to Texas earlier with her husband, who had been killed as a filibuster during a military expedition against the Spanish. She bought land in Austin's colony and ran a boarding house in Brazoria. She is sometimes referred to as the mother of Texas. So why did they come? A lot of them came for economics because cheap land allowed them to make money off of farming. Some came to escape debt. Texas was another country, so if they owed money in the United States, if they moved to Texas, the people back in the United States had no legal claim on them. Also, a lot came just for the sense of adventure, going to a new country and starting a new life. The ones that came most were Anglo-Americans. There were some African Americans. They made up about a fourth of Austin's colony, but all of them came as slaves. They were brought as slaves by the Anglo-Americans. For women and children, their everyday life in Texas, the women's duties were they were in charge of the home, raising kids, but also they would have to help in the fields when it was time to pick the crops. Everyone in the family would have to work. There were very limited rights for women in Texas. Women could not vote, they could not hold office, and they could not serve on juries. Even with those limited rights, there were still a few important women. One was Mary Austin Holly. She was related to Stephen F. Austin. She owned land in Galveston, and she's going to write one of the first early histories of Texas. Another is Anna Maria Calvillo, who owned a very large, important cattle ranch in South Texas and is also connected with the cattle industry in Texas. And for children, as far as getting an education, there were no public schools in Texas. For families, if they wanted to educate their kids, it was either done by the mothers, or if they were wealthy, they had to hire private tutors. Otherwise, the children in Texas worked and received no education. But the thing is, so many people will move to Texas that we get a phrase known as GTT, or Gone to Texas. This phrase people from the United States would carve into their doors when they left and moved to Texas so their families would know where they went. When they came across their homes abandoned and saw GTT carved on the door, this is especially prominent in places like Tennessee and the American South. And so many people would move to Texas that GTT would become a thing, and it's still a thing today, still a phrase that is used, this Gone to Texas. And so many people will go to Texas that they're going to start influencing the government, having ideas that's going to bring them into conflict with Mexico, that is going to influence the next stage in Texas history.